if he killed those two guards and got out, he would have been executed about 2 weeks later. Now, another point, to shield further his identity, Brushy Bill had no checking account. Now, I want you to really listen to this, because no imposter. I have checked, and there have been a lot of people claim to be Billy the Kid. There have been a lot of people claim to be Belle Starr. There have been a lot of people claim to be Frank James, but all of them were phonies, and every one of them were proven to be just what I said, just pure fakes, because they had a motive for coming out and making such statements, because they were either drunk, they wanted notoriety, they wanted publicity, or they wanted somebody to give them a hunk of money to pay off. That's all it was. But here was a man that he wanted his identity shielded all the time. He had never been known to have a checking or savings account in any bank. He refused to sign his marriage certificates. Right here in Hamilton County, Billy married the same woman twice. And he didn't know enough about the law and marriages. He married Lizzie, or Melinda, Allison of Carlton. He married her in January of 1944. Then in the summer of that same year, they must have had a fight, because he leaves her for a while. Then he comes back that same year in November. He didn't file for divorce. He goes right back to the county clerk and gets a new license, and he remarries her. But in both cases, I have letters from the county clerk stating that this was the only time in the history of that county that any person ever got marriage license without having to sign the marriage record book. How he did it, I asked the county clerk. She said, well, I don't know. The man who was county clerk at that time is now deceased. But she said, I imagine he must have been a friend, or for some reason he wanted to protect Billy. He never signed a voting registration. That's unusual. Back there in the days in Texas, as you people know, we used to have poll tax receipts. And if you voted, you had to sign and pay your poll tax. Billy didn't have any. Billy failed to endorse any check that he received from the Texas State Welfare Department at Austin, Texas. Also, Brushy Bill never made application for a Social Security card when the law went into effect. See, Billy was up in years in 1936. That law went into effect, and almost everyone, especially those who were broke, down and out and old as he was, but he never had, according to the Social Security Department in Baltimore, Maryland, he never was issued a Social Security card because he was afraid to accept federal money because his identity would already been established. Now, does that sound like someone who is an imposter? Certainly not. Next, here is something I think that brings right to home here in Hyco. You know, Billy died 3 weeks after he returned from Santa Fe, that miserable trip that he and his attorney went before Thomas Mabry, the governor of the state of New Mexico, to plead his right for a pardon. And lo and behold, he turned down. They had, in that room, the governor had promised to give a private audience to both Morrison and Billy. But that morning at 9 o'clock, we walked into the governor's office, and he said, gentlemen, let's go to the reception room, big room about the size of a lobby of a hotel. And he said, step right down the hall, we'll go in this door. So they went in, and lo and behold, there were cameras, news media, the radio. Of course, back there in 1950, there was no television at that time here. But there were state troopers lined up against the wall as an audience, plus 3 or 4 historians who were there to indict him as an impostor, because they had studied all the documents and everything, and they were dyed in the wool that he was an impostor. So Billy has a heart attack and had to be removed. He lost the sense of judgment. They asked him questions, and he just faded out of the picture, and they took him to the governor's private quarters, and he reclined on a divan for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then Mr. Morrison was able to get him some water, and he was able to get up and leave. And before he left, Governor Mabry said, "I am not having anything to do with this. I will not grant any pardon. Gentlemen, thank you," and he left. Well, Morrison takes Billy back to the La Fonda Hotel here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They got their clothes and suitcases together, and he put them in the car, and they headed back to El Paso, Texas, where Morrison was attorney there. Put him on the train and sent him back to Texas to his home. 3 weeks later, he died. Now, I'm getting to this very important part. Brushy Bill was buried on January the 3rd, 1951. He died on the 29th day of December of 1950. Now, the 6 pallbearers who carried his body from the church to the hearse to send it on its way down to Hamilton, these 6 men all knew Billy the Kid, or Brushy Bill Roberts. They knew who he was, his real identity. Now, 4 of these men were from East Texas. It was a cold, bad day, and they came almost 180 miles from Sulphur Springs, Canton, and Tyler, Texas, to be pallbearers. And one of those pallbearers, Mr. A.A. Norman, whose son is still living, and I have been in contact with him, and he tells me, and also in writing, that Brushy Bill, or Billy the Kid, had been in his daddy's home many times while he was a boy growing up, and he gave a very good character sketch of him. And this gentleman also, Mr. Norman, the pallbearer son, has Billy Shaps. I had him on exhibit out here at the First Interstate Bank of Roswell, New Mexico, about 3 years ago. It was on exhibit for 1 week in the lobby of the bank. And there's over 5,000 people who passed by to see those Shaps. They are priceless today. Now here is another very important conclusion. Attorney Morrison made a physical examination of Brushy Bill's body, which revealed many gunshot wounds or scars. He asked him, said, "Now, Billy, would you mind if I ask you to disrobe?" He said, "Not a bit at all." Off comes his shirt, dropped his trousers down, and Morrison, he wasn't a doctor, but he had heard that he'd had many scars from his fights, and sure enough, he did. And so, one bullet scar, in particular here, came from the pistol of Deputy Sheriff Matthews. Now, Matthews was shot. He was shooting at Billy behind an adobe wall, and Billy and his cohorts were firing on the other side, and one of the bullets caught Billy in the hip. And the bullet glazed off the hip bone and went down penetrated the downward direction and lodged in the calf of his left leg, which was never removed and was visible through the skin. Now this was his attorney Morrison, and he felt the bullet in underneath the skin. Now that bullet was there for, well, about 70 years, because Billy was about 21 at the time that he was shot. And we're speaking here now when he was 90 years old. Now, for comparison review. Now let's compare Brushy Bill, and let's compare this man they call William Bonney. Now I want to tell you this. William Bonney was not his name. He took the name Bonney from his Aunt Kathleen Bonney. That's a matter of record. And yet your history books will tell you, and the reference books, that he was born in New York, which is not a word of truth to it at all. And at the time of the shooting up here at Fort Sumter, 2 or 3 days after it, there were dozens of newspaper men and people from all over the West and the East. I believe it was the New York Sun newspaper sent 2 reporters all the way by train and part of the way by stagecoach to come out here and take time to get a good story. Now, we're going to make this comparison now. We find from this study, research, the identical sizes as historical statements appear in books for Brushy Bill and William Bonney, namely, is their height, 5 foot 8 inches in height. Weight, 150 to 160 pounds. Head or hat size, size 7. Size of shoes, size 7. Waist, 28 to 30 inches. Protruding ears. Now all of you have seen pictures, the old tin type pictures of Billy the Kid. You notice his left ear was protruding. Have you seen the late pictures of Brushy Bill Roberts? Identical. Now, photos also reveal, now I want you all to follow this very carefully. Now this is extremely important as a conclusion. Billy's eyes were blue-gray with light brown specks in the center of the pupil of each eye. This fact was reinforced with affidavits, legal affidavits, by those who knew the kid or Brushy Bill Roberts. Henry Heath, who is now living, a man about 40 years of age, he's the 3rd cousin, one of the cousins of Brushy Bill. And he has 4 children. He too has light blue gray eyes with a brown speck in the pupil of the eye. And his wife, I have her letters, she also tells me that 2 of the 4 children had the same identical eyes as her 3rd cousin, who was none other than Billy the Kid, William Bonney, or Brushy Bill Roberts. Now, another comparison. Dr. Cruz, a dentist in Gladewater, Texas. This is in a sworn affidavit by DeWitt Travis, one of the men that I read off a while ago, who made another affidavit. But in that particular affidavit, he too again reinforces that Dr. Cruz in 1932 in Gladewater, Texas, witnessed, and the fee was paid by DeWitt Travis for the extraction of those 2 teeth. Now in the pictures you'll notice that both the old tin type and Brushy Bill's picture when he made it 24 years of age, his upper lip did protrude because of the eye teeth underneath were large and they were more or less out of place by nature. Now, another characteristic or conclusion of Brushy Bill and Billy the Kid. Now, all of you have read in your history books, in your reference books, where the day at the jail there in Lincoln Town, that one of the guards went out and Billy was locked to the floor. He had iron chains around his ankles, and it was embedded in the floor, the wooden floor. It had a 12-foot joist flooring, heavy oak wood. And then he was handcuffed in by hand as well as by the ankles. And when one of the deputies left, he was able to free himself because his wrist. Both these men now, or one, had large wrists but small hands, which made it possible to slip off a pair of handcuffs without any difficulty, and that's exactly what he did. That was the way he freed himself, and then he was able to break the chain to get loose from the floor. Then he picks up the shotgun and he kills a detective there on duty, and then later he kills the one across the street from the jail who heard the shot and he came across. Now here's another comparison. Both so-called gentlemen, their voices, both had a rather high-pitched voice range at times, and both of them were fast talkers. Now we have heard the tape that was made by Brushy Bill Roberts in Stanton, Missouri, on September the 6th, 1949, when he went there with a lot of his old buddies for a celebration of one of their number for a birthday party, and that was taped, and I have heard his voice, and it is identical to what we have read from many books. That is, he talked fast to the point where his words sometimes appeared to be stacked on top of each other, and it was hard to distinguish exactly all of his work. Also in 1950, the NBC radio, New York City. All of you remember the radio program back there in those days called We the People. Billy the Kid, or Brushy Bill, was on that program. And he was not identified as Billy the Kid. Oh no. He was identified as a friend of the person that they were interviewing at that time. And he was asked where he lived. He told him Highcote, Texas. And in that tape also, he speaks very fast with a rather high-pitched voice. Now that's important, all those things, because you've got personalities, you've got eyes, you've got teeth, you've got everything, and these cannot be disputed because they are in all of our books. And this man could not be an imposter. It'd be impossible for anybody to, after seeing and knowing and what evidence we have gathered from this research, he is the real Billy the Kid. Now, one of the most important, to me, the personal comparison here in the statement that Billy made to Mr. Morrison. He said the most important thing that comes to his mind, he says, all these years, now this is a direct quote, all these years I have been running and hiding when I knew I wasn't wrong, but I had to hide. Been thinking about it more since I don't have long to be here. That meant he knew that death was around the corner. At that time, when he made this, he was almost 91. He says here, I want to get things straightened out before I die. I do. I've been a good, useful citizen, and I think I deserve a break. If we have to go to court, I can still tell them a few things. That ring, which he's referring to, meant the Santa Fe crooked lawyers and politicians was terrific, he said. I'm not afraid to talk if you don't let them lock me up. 69 years, Morrison, is a long time to collect memories, my friend. So you see right here, that is about as personal as anyone can be. Now let me say something else. This man, Brushy Bill Roberts, was never known to be in trouble at Highcote. And I doubt if any of you people that are listening have ever heard anybody accuse this man of anything. Now, when did he have a change of heart? He had a change of heart about 1884 when he was up in the state of Idaho looking for his daddy. And he learned, of course, that his daddy had been killed. He joined a Baptist missionary church. Now this was a little outpost where the wagon trains going to Oregon would stop, change horses, and the people would rest and get new supplies. And his daddy was working as a guard on those wagon trains for protect those people from the Indians. And he joins up. He went to one of the services, and I guess he had a change of heart. So Billy was truly a born-again Christian. And from that day on, we don't find anything that this man has ever done. Now, let me point out that for 40 years, after he comes back to Texas, about 1895, from Dakotas, Wyoming, so on, he followed the circuit, the rodeos in Texas and these other states that I've mentioned. As a matter of fact, in 1904, ladies and gentlemen, right here in your area, Billy was in the parade at Comanche, Texas on July the 4th. And what name he used then, I don't know. But I also know that this man worked in 1930 during the Depression, when things were real bad. He worked in a turkey dressing processing company at Comanche. I've been there, I've talked to the ex-sheriff, talked to the county judge, and they said, well, sure, we have that process plant still here. I said, well, do you know where the young barbershop is? He said, no, that man died and the barbershop closed. Well, I said, Brushy Bill, or Billy the Kid, he mentioned that that's where he went for the barber to have his hair cut. And he also mentioned he worked at processing the turkeys. Now, what was his job there? He was a turkey picker. He picked the feathers off the turkey. Now, that was during the 1930. When things got worse in 32, 33, those of you who are up in years, you remember the Depression. You know how hard things were. Billy had to lean on his friends for just keep body and soul together. So he writes to DeWitt Travis. And those of you also know that in 1930 and 31 was when the big oil boom broke out in East Texas. When you couldn't find a room at any price at Gladewater, Henderson. I know, I was there as a kid myself. And I was with my dad, and I know how hard it was. You stand in line for 30 minutes to an hour to get a cup of coffee and a hamburger. Now, that's what the conditions were over there, and Mr. DeWitt Travis was an oil man. He took Billy in and supported him for, well, during the Depression. And he was the man who paid the funeral expenses right here in Hyco. And the reason that Billy was not buried in Hyco was the fact that he wanted to be independent enough. His wife said, let's bury him in Hamilton. And he was buried in a plotter's field, so to speak. It's a graveyard there. Now, what I propose to do later on, with the help of you people in this community, in this county, we want to bring that body back and bring it back here to Hyco and bury him right where he belongs. He's born here. Why not bury him here? I have letters from his third cousins who have given me complete authority to do whatever is necessary to move his body back to his hometown or home area if I pay the expenses. Now, what more evidence is necessary coming from a professional research historian like myself, who has been involved for more than 6 years with documented evidence to support in detail the humble story told by Brushy Bill to his friend and lawyer, William Morrison. Mr. Morrison died in 1977. He was crushed as a man when he came out of the office of the governor here in New Mexico. He goes back to El Paso, as I said, puts Billy on the train, sends him back to Hyco. But after that, it wasn't long that he too had a first heart attack. He lived a number of years, and then he had another one, and he had his final heart attack in 1977 and died in El Paso. Now, a personal word from me. I want to thank you, good people, for your interest and concern for your fellow citizens of Hyco, Texas, and trust my attempt to reopen the pages of history in order for the real truth, not legends, about Billy, or Brushy Bill, to be one and the same person. I challenge any historian, any university, any foundation in the United States to prove that I'm wrong. Again, it's been a pleasure to bring this message to you today. Thank you.